Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that honestly reads straight out of a high-stakes corporate thriller, one that's literally shaking the foundations of the global semiconductor market right now. We're talking about the explosive rise of Changsin Memory Technologies, or CXMT. These guys have seemingly come out of absolutely nowhere to disrupt a multi-billion-dollar industry that, as you know, is traditionally dominated by a very small, very tightly guarded club of tech giants. Okay, let's dive into this. 719%. That is CXMT's staggering year-over-year revenue surge in the first quarter of 2026. Just let that number sink in for a second. While the established players were mapping out, steady, incremental growth, CXMT hit the market with an absolute shockwave. They jumped from being a relatively quiet domestic manufacturer to a global heavyweight almost overnight.
To figure out how this massive disruption happened, we're going to break this down into 6 parts. The DeepSeek moment, state backing in the IPO, their IP strategy and espionage, a technology reality check, the bull versus bear case, and finally, geopolitical risks and the future.
So let's kick things off with part 1, the DeepSeek moment and that $487 billion shockwave.
You know how the AI model DeepSeek suddenly completely upended the massive legacy tech models? Well, CXMT is doing the exact same thing, but in the hardware world. Take a look at the sheer scale of their July 2026 IPO on the Shanghai Star Market. It was actually Asia's largest IPO of the entire year. They raised $8.6 billion, pushing the company's valuation to a staggering $487 billion. The sheer force of this public offering literally sent shockwaves through global markets. It crashed competitor stocks as investors suddenly realized, wow, a massive new challenger has officially arrived.
Hey, this wasn't just some paper valuation. This financial explosion translated directly into hard market power. CXMT nearly tripled its global DRAM market share in just 12 months, surging from 3% in the first quarter of 2025 up to 8% in Q1 of 2026. In the notoriously high-barrier memory market, capturing 5% of global market share in a single year, that is practically unheard of.
Moving on to part 2, state backing and IPO, or the power of national capitalism.
So how exactly did they pull this off? Well, this definitely wasn't your standard Silicon Valley garage startup story. Pre-IPO, state entities owned over 36% of CXMT. The company was heavily backed by China's National Semiconductor Big Fund, specifically Phase 2 and the Hefei local government. And when they finally went public, they didn't just rely on everyday retail investors. They brought in massive cornerstone investors like the National Social Security Fund, China Life, and a captive ecosystem of domestic tech giants. We're talking Xiaomi and Alibaba. What we're looking at here is a highly coordinated national strategy to achieve semiconductor self-sufficiency.
That brings us to part 3, IP strategy and espionage, where we investigate their origins.
But look, having unlimited capital is really only half the battle here. The memory chip market is protected by decades of fiercely guarded patents. CXMT was founded back in 2016 by Zhu Yiming, and by 2019 they executed a pretty brilliant legal maneuver. They acquired 2.8 terabytes of intellectual property from a bankrupt German memory firm called QMonda. This gave them a crucial foundational architecture known as buried wordline. However, to bridge the massive gap from that legacy tech to modern 10-nanometer class chips, international prosecutors allege things took a much darker turn between 2023 and 2025. According to indictments from South Korean prosecutors, former employees of Samsung and SK Hynix allegedly stole core DRAM processes and transferred them right over to CXMT. Prosecutors claim this whole operation involved multi-million-dollar salaries, $1 million bribes just for patent negotiation strategies, and even the use of secret codes. For example, they allegedly used the code phrase 4 hearts to avoid detection by national intelligence while transferring 16-nanometer DRAM recipes. It's an intense situation that's already resulted in several arrests, and it really highlights the absolute high-stakes nature of this global tech race.
Okay, let's get into part 4, the technology reality check, separating the hype from the hardware. So, moving past those dramatic origins and the massive IPO, we really need to evaluate the actual hardware. The reality is, CXMT is doing incredibly well in legacy memory. They absolutely dominate the general DDR4 and DD5 markets, the stuff that powers our everyday PCs and smartphones. But their Achilles heel is at the cutting edge. They are currently blocked from acquiring EUV lithography machines, which, as we know, are completely essential for making the most advanced chips. Because of this block, analysts estimate they're fundamentally stuck 3 to 5 years behind the top players in developing high-bandwidth memory, or HBM. And that's the crucial memory needed for driving the advanced AI applications shaping our future.
And this brilliantly illustrates a bizarre paradox in the market right now. The AI boom actually helped CXMT. Making those advanced HBM chips takes up a massive amount of factory space, what the industry calls a capacity penalty. As the top global firms frantically shifted their production capacity to build AI chips, they basically abandoned the traditional PC and mobile memory market. This created a massive supply vacuum, which people are dubbing Ramageddon, and it left the door wide open, allowing CXMT to swoop in and completely capture the legacy market.
When you look at the global hierarchy, this technological divide becomes crystal clear. While CXMT is growing at just a staggering pace, they're still fundamentally behind the big three: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. Those three are currently mass-producing advanced 1B and 1C nodes and leading the HBM3E market. Meanwhile, CXMT is still optimizing its 16 to 17 nanometer G4 nodes, and they're only in the early sampling phase for the older generation HBM3.
Which leads perfectly into Part 5, the bull versus bear case, or Wall Street's trillion yuan debate.
This deep technological divide has sparked one of the most intense debates on Wall Street right now. How do you actually value a company that has unlimited capital and a massive domestic market, but is physically blocked from buying the most advanced manufacturing equipment? Let's look at the optimistic side first. The bull case, championed by firms like Nomura, sets a highly aggressive target price of 116 yuan. Their argument is pretty straightforward. Global AI memory consumption is going to jump 7-fold by 2030. Even if CXMT isn't making the absolute top-tier AI chips right now, their total dominance over China's captive domestic market for literally everything else is going to guarantee them massive long-term premium value. So the crucial point here is how you view that lack of advanced equipment. Because the bear case, presented by analysts like Morningstar, is deeply conservative. They're setting a target of just 14.90 yuan. They argue that the inability to buy EUV equipment isn't just some temporary hurdle. They see it as a permanent structural ceiling. Without EUV, CXMT has to rely on older, way less efficient methods, and that will inevitably lead to dropping yields, skyrocketing manufacturing costs, and ultimately, a product that will always have to be sold at a heavy discount compared to global rivals. And finally, Part 6, Geopolitical Risks and the Future, the ultimate endgame. That brings us to the final and perhaps most volatile piece of the CXMT puzzle, the extreme external pressures that could either accelerate their dominance or just completely derail their future. There is a huge looming black swan risk hanging over the company right now. In June of 2026, the U.S. Department of Defense officially added CXMT to its Chinese military company list. If this escalates into full Commerce Department sanctions, it could completely sever CXMT's access to vital global supply chains, literally cutting off their software, materials, and equipment overnight. And as we look ahead to 2027, this dynamic builds into a major market threat. By then, the global big three will finish expanding their AI chip factories, which means the supply of normal memory is going to bounce right back. But at the exact same time, CXMT will have maxed out its massive new factories, producing 420,000 wafers a month. When that normalized global supply collides head-on with CXMT's massive output, experts warn we are likely going to see a brutal chicken game of oversupply. For consumers, hey, this might mean dirt-cheap memory for our devices. But for the industry, it means completely decimated profit margins across the board.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly high-stakes question. Will CXMT leverage its unprecedented state backing, that massive IPO cash, and sheer scale to rewrite the rules of global memory? Or will the combination of technological bottlenecks, intense IP lawsuits, and severe geopolitical sanctions form an unbreakable structural ceiling? The answer to that is going to define the next decade of technology. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the memory market because it's only going to get more interesting from here.